Startup unicorns, those private companies estimated to be worth $1 billion or more, they've grown from 49 to 352 over the past decade. But economic productivity indicators are stagnant, validating some of our feelings that we have just been on a massive hamster wheel. How can we make sense of outrageous innovation with this daily feeling of being stuck? That's why my guest this week is veteran tech executive advisor and angel investor Anthony Putignano, here to talk about the connection between venture capital and creative waste. This is going to be a good one. But first, welcome to this week's episode of Make Sense, a video podcast that simplifies complex issues at the intersection of tech and people. There are many. So whether you're totally hyped on artificial intelligence and ready for the robot takeover, or you want to crawl into a cave after deleting all of your social media accounts, I'm here with my guest to help make sense of what's going on so we can all design ourselves into the future. Wouldn't that be nice? My name is Lindsay, the Lady Engineer. I'm a pragmatic futurist and human first technologist, serial entrepreneur, and innovation consultant. If you're new here, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So let's make sense of creative technology waste and how we can do better. Anthony, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm excited for this conversation. We met at Philly Tech Week. You came to my tech walk, and I think it was immediately like, wow, we think the same. So let's like get busy and talk.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. It's time for Crystal Ball. What does the future hold? I'm going to call out predictions for this year. My guest, Anthony, will tell me whether they're realistic or insane. So for each prediction, Anthony, I want you to give us your raw reaction. Yes, no, maybe over my dead body, whatever it is. Okay,
Sounds good.
let's do it. Unicorns, those $1 billion valuation or more private companies, need a new playbook to survive. Global equity dollars and deals hit the lowest levels in 6+ years. At the end of 2023, there were 309 publicly disclosed startup deaths. Those startups that shut down in 2023 had raised over 4.1 billion in equity from 2019 to 2022. Is this happening? And also, where did that money go?
So um, the money, I would say, has largely been wasted, right? It's cheap capital that is thrown after these big plays. In some cases, big bets that may have paid off. In a lot of cases, I think just irresponsible spending, and that money is not coming back. Butts and seats, compute, all that stuff. The money was spent and it is not coming back.
Hmm. So do unicorns need a new playbook to survive?
I think they do, and I think that playbook has, I think that playbook is something that businesses have been doing for a long time, right? It's just thinking about the fundamentals. How are you going to make revenue? How are you going to go to market? Are you going to be able to turn a profit in the near future? And on and on. And it's less of these big plays that require multiple successes over a long time to pay off.
So you're talking about the kind of big plays are, investors giving a ton of money to a startup to see if they can go big or go home, kind of thing. It's not about that. It's not about that in a lot of traditional businesses. It shouldn't be about that in these startups.
Correct. And I also think it's about more direct monetization, right? You have a product, you're going to sell it to a specific direct, consumer, whether that's a business or an individual. And it's simple. Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. We will continue this conversation in segment 2 for sure. So, second headline, on a positive side, possibly the democratization of technology. So, next generation technology like no code design studios will enable non-professionals and non-technical professionals to engage in things like fraud detection, sales forecasting, customer experience improvements more efficiently and with less risk.
100%. I think, that has been happening for at least a decade or so now. We're seeing that with, I think, the sophistication of these types of tools, the advent of a lot of, generative AI now being built into them that is only becoming, more and more important and more usable for the folks who need to leverage it. So absolutely.
Yeah. I think one of the big hurdles is that most people are most comfortable just using Excel instead of learning a tool that may keep the data, you know, safe and secure that they're playing with. I would love to see these no code design studios help these professionals do things that they would do with Excel, um, while also keeping all of the data safe.
Yeah, I could see that. And, there are tools that have been not only gaining momentum, but at this point, I think are quite prevalent, um, that in my opinion do that, right? So if you look at like an Airtable, it's Excel, yes, but, with proper permissions and validations and flows within those data tables and rows that really add that layer of protection on top of an Excel that you might need, while also making it easy to quote unquote code against for the average user.
Yeah, gives them more complex technology, like complex capabilities to tackle complex use cases.
Right, right.
Uh, so, third headline. Is this part of the solution? DIY software development is going to append engineering orgs. So, huge demand for software developers, skills gap, uh, you know, they need all of these tools to help them. So is it gonna throw engineering for a loop if, non-technical professionals in the org are doing coding type stuff?
Um, I think that if you look back decades, this has been, on the rise, and generative AI isn't going to, create this inflection point where everything changes. It just continues to accelerate, right? And it's been accelerating this whole time. You just had a question about low code tools. My response was that, look, this has been happening for 10 years already. You have users in average, average users in organizations using tools like, Zapier and Airtable and all this sort of stuff. And the reality is that they've been building out their own complex workflows using tools that increasingly don't require them that don't require them to code. And that is speeding up more than ever. But no, I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's fantastic. It opens up time for engineers to be doing what they do best, which is really innovating versus just gluing stuff together.
Yeah, so do you think it's going to upend engineering orgs? I always like to clue in a specific word. Like, is it, I mean, I think engineering orgs are generally already upended in a lot of ways.
I do not. I respect that opinion, of course, and I could see where everybody is coming from on this, but I think that the job of a true engineer, at least in engineering orgs that excel, is to innovate. It's always to kind of look at where the boundary is and then try to push past it. And in that respect, absolutely nothing changes except for the fact that the boundary is now moved forward a little bit.
So I do have a theory or observation that I've been working on through Make Sense episodes in 2024. There's been a few of them, including one on the Excel addiction within the enterprise. Okay, I want to run it by you and see what your observation is.
Sure.
Average enterprise IT department spends 30 to 50% of their time and resources making up and addressing issues for shadow IT. Shadow IT is our kind of engineering IT projects going on in the organization outside of the secure infrastructure. I say mostly that's Excel because what happens is that someone is using an enterprise software, let's just say an SAP ERP or something like that, and the ERP is inflexible to a new use case. So they export the CSV to manipulate the data themselves. Now you have data, potentially customer data, that is in a spreadsheet, uh, and it's unsecure, and some random employee selects a phishing link, and that is how all of the data in the corporation and all the customer data gets exposed to hackers, right? So I guess one, is that a logical kind of user flow of data and what's happening in security vulnerabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I do think it's worth internalizing that that is a slice of the broader shadow IT problem, right? If an employee goes and uses ChatGPT and they're not supposed to, that's shadow IT. If they use tools like Zapier to glue together APIs of products that they're sanctioned to use, but Zapier itself is not a product that they're sanctioned to use, that's shadow IT. And so this is, a problem that's existed for a long time. And there are always these powerful and generic tools that come along that enable new flows in an organization that come along, obviously, with a lot of benefits. It's why users are incented to use them, but may or may not be sanctioned and then create this risk. So it's definitely a problem. It does go beyond Excel as well.
Yeah. So we see, so Excel cannot be my scapegoat. I guess I get that. But we see, but we do see potential that if we have more no code and low code tools that are secure, that are approved by the organization, we can hopefully create less shadow IT problems, not more, and free up the engineering resources to innovate, as you say, or address much bigger issues within the organization.
That's exactly right. Shadow IT, in my view, if you look at it in terms of society and government, like a metaphor there, it's almost like decriminalization, right? It's compliance folks who know that there is this need and know that it is being solved without them specifically, sanctioning it, but at the same time are unwilling to go through that motion of explicitly sanctioning it. And so to me, the security and compliance teams at these orgs need to work faster to keep up with the value that's being provided to end users. So that, rather than being incented to go around those teams, users just work with them to get that value properly.
100%. And in the next segment, we will talk about how we can move faster and be more efficient. All
Excellent.
right. Now it's time for how did we get here and what now? Technology trends and predictions move a lot slower, actually, than the media reports. The media makes it sound like everything's moving so fast, but the average software project goes 3x over scope. So, what's with the pace and what's with the waste? So, today with Anthony, we're talking about what drags down creative technology teams, how much waste they create, and how we can drive to a ton better outcomes when it comes to innovation and creativity. It's time to do better. We want the human experience in the future. Anthony, in a recent article for your newsletter, you wrote about zero interest rate phenomenon, pointing out that low interest rates made a ton of capital available to startups. That's where we are talking about the unicorns. And there was a ton of waste and unnecessary complexity as a result. Could you tell us maybe what's like the most obvious sign that a company is being really wasteful and creating unnecessary complexity?
For me, the less obvious the business model is, and the less a business is talking about, the way they directly monetize what they are creating, the more likely it is that there are a lot of optics at play, and there's a lot of sort of cheap money involved to help a business take multiple leaps to theoretically some kind of eventual monetization. And so to me, that's always the number one warning sign. As you get deeper into an organization, there tend to be other warning signs, like if the business is taking on a lot of money and the plan for how to use it is just to hire a bunch of people, well, that's great. Maybe that is the right thing to do, but the question is, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve with those people, and is that a good use of capital or a bad use? The questioning often stops a little bit before that, and that's the problem.
Yeah, so for listeners that might simply be consumers of technology, uh, you probably get the feeling that the company or product you're using is not doing so great when you start to get unhappy about your experience too. So if the experience starts to downgrade, then the company's probably putting resources in places that they shouldn't be putting as well, right? So I think you said that in your articles that unhappy customers are like the biggest sign that a company is not heading in the right direction.
Yeah, that's right. And just to clarify a little bit more, I think the user satisfaction is sort of an eventual outcome of acting that way. So sometimes you don't quite see it at first, but you realize after a while, if you start to, use a service that is sort of based on cheap capital, that over time they start to panic and try to figure out, all right, how do we monetize now? How do we kind of try to get profitable now? And that starts to lead to really weak user experiences.
Yeah. So I have an example of a unicorn, and am I'm mistaking it with better health, which I know is like therapy. There's another one that's enterprise like coaching, but they use AI matching to match employees and coaches, and they were given unicorn status. But when I talk to companies or employees of companies that use this coaching service, they hit a dead end on the AI matching. They match with up to three, and if you don't like any of the three, you hit a dead end, right? So
Yep.
that's a result of a company spending a lot of money on automation and not focusing on what their customers need for sure.
Yeah, that's right. I look at it in the early stages of being a startup. There are multiple phases of risk, and the very first phase is technological risk. In other words, can you even do what you're saying on paper? Your core value is, and in a case like that, think about how crazy it is that a company is being given unicorn status. In other words, they're saying they can make at least 100 million of ARR to get to about $1 billion in revenue, and they haven't even de-risked that technological component yet. You cannot do
Hmm.
that without cheap and abundant capital.
Okay. So if we are on the creative technology team, we're not the customer, we're on the team. How can we tell if the team is creating a ton of waste?
It's a really great question. And the problem I would say is that nobody has really agreed, at least in an engineering context, what constitutes waste, right?
Mm,
Engineers are the experts. They'll tell you, a certain type of system or technology or outcome is required in order for them to then produce further outcomes down the line. And then business folks say, okay, well, if that's what they're saying we need, then we'll invest in it. And it's not really questioned until you start to get into a winter like we're in now, right? Um, for me, I think it's thinking about things as a business from a zero-based mentality. What I mean by that is, rather than starting with a bunch of funds that are available and then asking, how are we going to spend them? It's more about asking, what is the outcome we want to achieve, and what's the least amount of money that we could spend to get there. And what I find is that if you challenge engineers to do that, they're very, not only willing but wanting to do that, because um, you know engineers love innovation, and figuring out how you could get to a really amazing outcome with a very small amount of resources is in and of itself a form of innovation. They love this stuff, but you have to frame that challenge to them the right way.
It is 100% an engineering thing. I am an engineer myself. My dad was an engineer. He always said, engineering is solving the problem with the time, resources, and skills that you have,
Absolutely.
right? And I used to actually make a lot of waves when I was on creative technology teams, product teams, because the higher ups that were non-technical, they wanted me to design 3 or 4 different options of what we could potentially do. But I already knew our team was on a time crunch. I knew how our team was operating over a year of 1 week sprints. And I was like, this is what we can do in the time that we have.
That's right.
And they saw me as being difficult because I wouldn't design them rainbows and sprinkles. And I don't want to give them options that we don't have time to do, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and not only that, right? But the more time you spend producing options, the less time you have even for whatever one that you choose, right? And so that's sort of a vector that needs to be very carefully, looked at as well.
So, Anthony, you said that over engineering and what waste constitutes waste is not a standard acceptable. Like, there's no standard accepted definition of what over engineering and waste is. Say that the engineering field is very, yeah, there's a lot of different components. One of my things that kind of gets on me is that all software developers are called engineers, but not all software developers are engineers themselves, right? There are software developers that are meant to just fix things and not really innovate because they haven't taken the coursework and the training and experience to be a problem solver. So, like, why do you think it is that we can't even address what over engineering and waste is if we can't agree on what it is in the first place, right? So, to address that problem, we need to agree. Why aren't we agreeing? I kind of think because the field doesn't have a true discipline.
This is a really good topic. It's something that I've talked about with folks over the years, quite extensively. And you're right. There are a lot of software developers. There are a lot less, engineers. I make it a point on my teams, especially in, smaller companies with smaller teams where I have the benefit of being able to do this, to really look for engineers. You asked a question before about, is software engineering or development, I can't remember which term you use, going to be appended. And I think that this is a great, distinction, because software development very well may be appended, but software engineering will not be, right? Because there's a difference between producing a bunch of code and actually solving problems at the frontier. Um, and so, for me, it's important for companies to focus on bringing in engineers, not just developers. And that is ultimately a sort of line between waste and proficiency, right? Because an engineer is just going to want to solve the problem, usually with the least amount of resources. Whereas folks who just
That's
kind of,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Whereas in tech, with development, it's more just about, what tech is out there and how could we use it, which is a very different motivation.
Right. So I tread on this conversation lightly because I don't want to offend anyone. I actually looked at your profile and I wasn't sure what your education was, and you're very talented and you're very accomplished. And for me to be like, I don't think you should call yourself a software engineer unless you have an engineering degree, some people find offensive. It's also overlooking the fact that we just don't have enough people. We don't have enough software developers as it is. If we start gatekeeping who can be a engineer and who can't, you know, that's going to cause an even bigger supply problem. But
Yeah.
are there certain use cases where we should be very clear about software engineers working on them versus general software developers?
Yeah, well, let me rewind just a little bit because you mentioned the degree thing, and I do want to address that. Look, I don't think you should require a degree to be a software engineer. I don't, this is a slightly separate subject, but I don't think you should require a degree to do most things. Obviously, it's important for, a doctor who's operating on you, a surgeon, to have a degree, but there are very limited specialties where I think this is the case. And if you rewind, um, you know, apprenticeships for hundreds and hundreds of years were really the way that people became experts at things. And this is not a degree. And so um, I don't have a degree. I don't claim to be a software engineer today. I've spent a lot of time, leading over the last 10 to 15 years. Uh, but I do know there is a point at which I could have legitimately called myself that because I knew how to solve problems and I knew how to get the right people together to solve them in an educated way. And what is an engineer if not somebody who knows how to solve problems proficiently in whatever context they're doing it? So it's about the outcomes. It's not about the inputs. Um, your question about sorry, what was the follow up, Lindsay?
The second question was like, are there specific applications? And it's
Yeah.
kind of a leading question because I have a very firm answer that when it comes to our national security, our cybersecurity, our financial institutions, and our healthcare information, I really believe that that's where degrees and certifications or some types of qualifications uh, and exams are really necessary.
Yeah, so I agree with that to an extent. This is obviously just going to leverage my previous answer quite a bit, but to me, it's about the outcomes. Just show us that you know what you need to know, and that could be demonstrated on a series of, screeners and tests. It doesn't need to come from a degree. But where I do agree with you is that there are a lot of people these days that lean on those degrees to get that information. It's not exactly easy to find apprenticeships or fertile ground to kind of just learn organically. So I view this as a yes and. It's not, there's no right or wrong, but it's more just about somebody needs to get to an outcome. That outcome needs to be tested in a somewhat standardized way, and I do agree with that.
All right. So make sense is about elevating the way we innovate so that the human experience is first in the future. And that means we do need to do better. Now we've kind of established that defining the problem is hard in itself because there's not a lot of agreement about what waste and complexity looks like. But we can tell you that when your customers start to get unhappy, that's a problem. When your developers can't onboard to the code, that's a problem.
Yeah.
When you can't stick to your plan and deliver in a timely way, like that is also another problem. Um, but I have, when it comes to like doing better, I want to get your uh, ideas and suggestions. But first, I want to give my one little known truth about product development and technology. Then I'd like to talk about some of your suggestions.
Love to hear it.
So, the art to product management, technology development, engineering, the art to these fields is more about what not to build than what to build.
I think it depends on the phase, right? Early on, that idea is important, right? So that idea, forms, what to build. But you are right that very shortly after that, very shortly, it the field of what you can build to solve that problem rapidly I would say outpaces the amount of resources you have. And so from there, it becomes a filtering problem. And that really goes on for decades after that business is built.
Forever.
Yeah. Yep.
Forever. It's about, again, it's about the definition of minimal viable product has gotten lost over the past 15 some years.
Right.
It really is the smallest amount of features needed to solve the problem. Okay. And we very much have lost that. People describe MVPs and it's like a fully fleshed out app. And that is not an MVP, right? So again, I'll just repeat for everyone, the art to product management, particularly in the early stages, but almost forever, is more about what not to build than what to build. A minimal viable product, your initial kind of prototype, is the smallest amount of features needed to solve the problem, right?
Yeah.
Smallest of features. So now, Anthony, give us your list of ways we can elevate the way we innovate.
Oh man, could you get a little bit more specific with that? Like, what around innovation are you curious about?
Okay, so for instance, I know you've written about this, but keeping the problem scopes that you're attacking very small.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, I have been a big fan over time of variations on the MVP acronym. You know, minimum delightful product, minimum lovable product, and the reason for that is, founders and product owners and managers can often get a little bit disillusioned with this idea that they're just going to deliver a really small amount of features and that's going to be enough uh, to gain traction or gain the cachet that they want, and they sometimes think that what they need to do is build a lot more features, to your point, right? And so that's a problem. What they really need to do is, yes, limit the amount of features, but deliver the features that are left over in a way that's truly lovable and delightful, and shows whatever community is being built for that that this product is cared for and they are cared for, right? So I just love these terms like minimum delightful product and minimum lovable product. And so when we talk about reducing scope, for me, that's a big part of it. It's, yes, how do you reduce the feature scope as much as possible, but deliver it in a way that is extremely thoughtful, with a great user experience?
Often teams are not given enough time, really, from sales and marketing and business leadership. They're not given enough time to research and fully uh, think through what is the problem they need to solve. I will give you one other alternative to the MVP. I say that you can't have a minimal viable product without the real MVP, which is your most valuable problem. It's the problem that if you solve it, people will open their wallets and pay you. So, and I want something you said is, you know, that people add more features thinking this is the thing that will get them traction. And particularly when you're early on, like an MVP is not about traction, it's about feedback. And each level is you're adding on. It's like it's getting feedback, which ultimately will build your traction. So focusing on the customer and understanding if you're doing it right. If you give them less, they can help fill in the space. If you give them too much, they're going to give you feedback on stuff that isn't actually valuable to the solution. So yeah.
Completely agree. And what I often find is that early on, the reason founders and early teams do this is it's a way of hedging bets. And it's the complete opposite of what a startup is supposed to do, which is take some big risks around the one or two things that are most important. And to your point, get feedback and iterate from there.
Say that again about hedging bets. I think I know what you mean about, oh, we should build that because what if this happens, or we should build that because what if this other thing could happen?
Yeah, a startup will get really attached to a certain segment or a certain problem that they're solving for, which is great. And then they look at it and say, well, if we just had this one more feature, then we could hit these other two segments as well. Or if we just had this one more feature, then we might get 20% more MAUs or whatever it is. And um, it just they feel like it gives them more opportunity to grow bigger or to fail once or twice, and that's okay because they have these features over here that'll let them possibly succeed on a different frontier. And it's just the wrong way to think about it, because you have such a limited amount of resources as a startup, and you got to take some meaningful bets with those resources.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. There was one other thing that you had shared about sizing the number of employees to the problem, not vice versa. So, just to give our audience, if you're not familiar with the term sizing, often are you talking about in the term of like, here's a story, a feature that needs to be built, and we size up that feature to decide like how many employees need to be on it and how many sprints it's going to take to build it?
I think at a low level, yes. At a high level, you obviously cannot, go after investing or do 1 to 2 year planning that way, but it's all sort of part of the same business planning, just at different granularity levels, right? So I think what a great, founding team or set of early employees does is they look at the problem being solved and the collection of stories and epics that are likely required to get them to some meaningful MVP or early product. And they say, all right, the collection of that is going to cost us probably $1 to $2 million. But what often happens is the complete inverse. They go and shop things around and they get what the biggest check they possibly can, and then ask themselves, how are we going to go spend this? How much product can we build with this? And so it doesn't need to be super precise. It doesn't need to be accurate down to the story or the $10,000 increment. But the point is, let's not waste millions of dollars here.
Yeah, I one of my biggest pieces of advice, if you don't know, for those of you listening or Anthony, I've been reviewing startups as part of due diligence on behalf of investors since 2016. I've gone through over 100, probably 30 or 40 in full kind of detail and background. Uh, and the best way to figure out how much money your team needs or your company should be raising is to figure out, what's the milestone we want to hit in 18 to 24 months? What do we need to do to get there? And build up the budget from that point. And that includes building out your product roadmap and estimating the cost of all of those products. That way, right, you don't get a chunk of money and then are like, what do we do? And just hire a bunch of people because you know what? Once you add a person to your product team, you add another opinion, and people are subjective, right? So then you have to reconcile that opinion with everyone else's. So um, it's not just about what features not to build, it's also about holding back on hiring because you slow down before you speed up every new person you bring on.
Yeah, and look, what I think this is related to is this notion that the number one advantage that any startup or small business has is that they can remain nimble. They can do things quickly because they are small and because they're agile. And you give that up the minute you overhire or overcomplicate what you're trying to do too early. So it's just got to be avoided at all costs.
100%. So, how did we get here and what now? There's a ton of complexity and waste in technology teams and has a lot to do with people and us agreeing on what things even mean. Um, so, uh, to do better. We just need more time to plan out, think, and then keep our resources in a treasure chest and be really purposeful about how we spend them. So, Anthony, I wanted to play one last game with you before you leave.
All right.
Okay, let's end with a round robin called What Do You Know? This is where us relatively intelligent tech ecosystem insiders discuss some hot mess headlines that have made national news. And we don't claim to be experts, but we may know more than you do. Just like Crystal Ball, I want to get your reaction to these things. I kind of have a gaggle of, and excuse my language for anyone listening, but no shit Sherlock headlines. First headline, a cesspool. Laid off California tech workers are sick to death of LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think the job market more so than it's ever been is based on, optics more than it is skills. Have you built out your social media presence, and do you look hireable versus, are you hireable? And that's what that's all about. On the other hand, it is an opportunity for folks who might typically not have a spotlight on them to kind of showcase what they know and how they work without, perhaps a traditional resume.
Yeah. I always like to use this opportunity to tell people that your actual social network, the people you really know and have relationships with, are more likely to help you find a job than pressing apply, 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 apply. Okay. So if you don't want the spotlight on you on LinkedIn, then go into LinkedIn, only go to connections and contact the people you know and reconnect with them and talk to them about what you're up to.
Not
Control
only are
follow.
you more not only are you more likely to get a job that way, but you're also more likely, all other things being equal, you are likely going to be more successful in a job found that way as well.
100%. Second headline, most consumers hate the idea of AI generated customer service. 53% say they would move to a competitor if a company was going to use AI for customer service.
Yeah. Look, I think over the years we've been seeing this. There have been automated agents for a long time. The good news is that they're getting better. The bad news is that because they're getting better, there's even more of them. And so, to me, this isn't a binary. It's not like a company should deploy automated agents or not deploy them, but it's about tactfulness and taste in how it's done, in my view. I really appreciate when I could get immediate answers as a consumer to a problem I have because an automated bot is deployed. But if I need to go through more than 3 or 4 kind of conversation touches and it's clear that the bot is no longer helping me, I also want to be able to very quickly get to a human being. And so to me, it's not about this, black or white, right or wrong, do it or don't do it, but it's about, do it the right way.
Yep, I agree with that. Okay, so third headline, Russia is relying on unwitting Americans to spread election disinformation, U.S. officials say. Hi,
Yeah.
George. Who knew?
Yeah. And I think, obviously the news of the day is around Russia, but this is a global problem. Many different countries are using these tactics against many other countries, and this is only going to amplify over the next decade or two. And I think, this is really no different than, the consequences are obviously bigger, but in principle, this is no different than, deep fakes or anything else on a private level. And I think for better or worse, this is going to come down to individual people getting a lot more discerning about, what is real and what is not real, and learning to just not believe everything they see and hear without really understanding where did it come from. And this is going to be important with politics, but it's also going to be important with, just like everyday social engineering attempts and things like that as well.
I totally agree. And for new listeners to make sense, I encourage you to go back and listen to episode maybe 58 with Eric Goldman. He's a legal scholar. We talk about the TikTok ban and we talk about the accusations that US alleges against China. Well, most of those things we actually do ourselves as well. So Anthony is absolutely correct that this is a problem for anyone, everyone. Um, Anyway, that episode was great. And this episode with Anthony has been awesome. Let's make it make sense. There's so much room to improve, and we need your help. Thank you for listening to this episode because I believe this is going to make us better. So thanks for listening to Make Sense with me, your host, Lindsay Tabus, and guest, Anthony Putignano. We hope you enjoyed our take on complexity and waste in creative technology development. Anthony, where can people find you online?
Definitely check out my newsletter at anthonyputniano.com. All my musings are on there, and they're often, unorthodox, but interesting.
I think that they should not be considered unorthodox, and I am trying with Make Sense to uncover and interview more people that understand we need a significant change to improve the innovation and make sure the human experience is first in the future. So, as always, you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes, including a link to Anthony's newsletter. Final note, if you want to continue to be the smartest person in the room, make sure you're getting notified when each episode hits. On YouTube, hit subscribe for next week's episode. And for audio only, follow wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Anthony, for joining me.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's been great.